Senator Elizabeth Warren just did something that should terrify every politician who makes promises they cannot keep. She asked a simple question. President Trump promised to cap credit card interest rates at 10% by January 20th. Which banks have actually done it? The witness could not name a single one. Warren had the numbers. $57 billion in credit card interest above 10% that Americans have paid since January 20th. That is $368 million a day. $368 million a day for Donald Trump's broken promise.
Now, President Trump promised he was going to make banks lower credit card interest rates for families by January 20th. And so far, families have been paying $368 million a day for Donald Trump's broken promise. Now,
Warren began by thanking her Republican colleagues for holding a hearing about President Trump's affordability agenda. She noted that they do not seem to agree with Trump's claim that affordability is a fake word made up by Democrats. She asked the witnesses to raise their hands if they agree with the president. No hands went up. Not one. Even Republicans do not agree with Trump that the affordability crisis is a hoax.
In fact, I want to ask our witnesses about that. So raise your hand if you agree with the president that affordability is a hoax made up by Democrats.
Then Warren laid out the facts. Trump's agenda has driven up costs. Families are putting more on their credit cards. Trump's own top economic advisor, Kevin Hassett, bragged that credit card spending is through the roof. Over 100 million Americans have credit card debt now. Many of them are putting groceries and gas on their credit cards just to make it to the end of the month. Delinquencies are at the highest level since the crash of 2008.
Many of them putting groceries and gas on their credit cards just to be able to make it to the end of the month. And delinquencies are at the highest level since the crash of 2008.
Warren then turned to Trump's promise. In January, Trump promised to cap credit card interest rates at 10%. He gave the banks a deadline, January 20th. He said he would deliver it. Warren asked the witness, who represents the biggest banks, which banks have implemented the cap. The witness said there are low-cost APR options. Warren pressed, which banks have lowered their rates to 10%? The witness could not name one. She said there are options in the marketplace. Warren asked if there has been one. The witness could not answer.
And I just want, which banks have actually lowered their credit card interest rates to 10%? Can you give me their names?
There are definitely options that are low-cost APR
I'm sorry,
options.
which banks have lowered their credit card interest rate to 10%? Are there any that are at 10%? Can you name one?
I can tell you that there are options today.
Can you name
they don't have a
one
cap
bank
8%
that has lowered its credit card interest rate?
Warren then asked how much more Americans have paid in interest than they would have if the cap had taken effect. The witness said she had not done that calculation. Warren had. $57 billion, $368 million a day. That is the cost of Trump's broken promise.
Now, President Trump promised he was going to make banks lower credit card interest rates for families by January 20th. And so far, families have been paying $368 million a day for Donald Trump's broken promise. Now,
Warren then asked Dr. Morgan how families are coping. 1 in 3 are skipping meals. They are skipping medications. They are skimping on health care. They are turning to debt. Both. Cutting back and putting expenses on high-cost debt, credit cards, buy now, pay later, paycheck advance loans.
I mean, families are really struggling. As I said earlier, 1 in 3 are skipping meals. They're skipping medications that are prescribed by their doctors. They're skimping on healthcare services, and they're turning to debt. I think it's important to know that's a both and, right? We're seeing people both cut back on the things that they need to live their lives and also put their expenses onto high-cost debt, both credit cards, buy now, pay later, paycheck advance loans.
Warren ended with a warning. President Trump may love inflation, but it is killing American families. Congress needs to work together to fix the president's failed economic agenda. Let's watch.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, I'm really glad that we are holding a hearing about President Trump's affordability agenda, and I'm glad that my Republican colleagues don't seem to agree with President Trump's claim last week that, quote, affordability is a fake word made up by Democrats. In fact, I want to ask our witnesses about that. So raise your hand if you agree with the president that affordability is a hoax made up by Democrats. I'm giving you time here. Okay, no hands up, and I assume that means none of you, Democrats or Republicans, agree with President Trump that the affordability crisis facing American families is a hoax. And that seems right to me. You know, President Trump's agenda has driven up costs so that families are putting more of everything, from groceries to gas, on their credit cards. Trump's own top economic advisor, Kevin Hassett, recently bragged that, quote, credit card spending is through the roof. He's right. Over 100 million Americans have credit card debt now, many of them putting groceries and gas on their credit cards just to be able to make it to the end of the month. And delinquencies are at the highest level since the crash of 2008. So let's talk about affordability. In January, President Trump promised to cap credit card interest rates. He politely asked the biggest banks to put in place a 1-year 10% cap by January 20th. Now, Ms. Johnson, your organization represents some of the biggest banks in the country. We are more than 5 months past Trump's January 20th deadline. Which banks have implemented the 1-year 10% cap on credit card interest rates that President Trump promised to deliver?
So thank you for the question. There's a couple of things I'd love to say. One, banks offer 0% APRs today.
I'm sorry, I had a specific question. Donald Trump told the banks that they should lower their credit card interest rates to 10% by January 20th. He said that's what he would deliver for the American people, promised it to everyone in America. And I just want, which banks have actually lowered their credit card interest rates to 10%? Can you give me their names?
There are definitely options that are low-cost APR
I'm sorry,
options.
which banks have lowered their credit card interest rate to 10%? Are there any that are at 10%? Can you name one?
I can tell you that there are options today.
Can you name
they don't have a
one
cap at
bank
8%
that has lowered its credit card interest rate as President Trump
and no bank wants
politely
to cut
asked?
off credit to
Has there
people
been one?
with below 800.
Has there been one?
Including advocates
Has
who
there
say
been one? One?
there are options in the marketplace for sure, but
So not a single one has followed through on what President Trump told them to do. So President Trump and the big banks, they don't provide the 10% cap on credit cards. Ms. Johnson, how much more have Americans paid in interest on credit cards than they would have paid if the cap the president promised had taken effect? What's the number?
so again, I want to go back to
What's the number?
The rate. So we have not done that calculation.
I'll bet you haven't done that calculation, but here's the thing I have.
Sorry.
It's $57 billion in credit card interest rate above 10% that Americans have paid since January 20th. By the way, if you just do the math, that's $368 million a day. Now, President Trump promised he was going to make banks lower credit card interest rates for families by January 20th. And so far, families have been paying $368 million a day for Donald Trump's broken promise. Now, we know that families have less money to spend and are falling behind on their bills thanks to Donald Trump's economic policies. Dr. Morgan, if you can tell me very briefly, how are people coping with these tighter finances?
I mean, families are really struggling. As I said earlier, 1 in 3 are skipping meals. They're skipping medications that are prescribed by their doctors. They're skimping on healthcare services, and they're turning to debt. I think it's important to know that's a both and, right? We're seeing people both cut back on the things that they need to live their lives and also put their expenses onto high cost debt, both credit cards, buy now, pay later, paycheck advance loans.
Thank you. You know, President Trump may love inflation, but it's killing American families. Congress needs to work together to fix the president's failed economic agenda and to make life more affordable for all Americans. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
This hearing is a masterclass in how to expose a broken promise and hold the powerful accountable. Senator Elizabeth Warren did not come with a legal brief. She did not come with a prepared speech. She came with a simple question, a specific date, a specific promise, and a specific number. And she did not let the witness off the hook until she got the answer. The question was simple. President Trump promised to cap credit card interest rates at 10% by January 20th. Which banks have actually done it? The witness could not name a single one. Not one. Not a single bank has followed through on the president's promise. That is the first point. The promise was broken. The president said he would deliver something. He did not deliver it. The banks ignored him. And the American people are paying the price. The numbers are staggering. $57 billion in credit card interest above 10% that Americans have paid since January 20th. That is not a small amount. That is not a rounding error. That is $57 billion that could have gone to groceries, to rent, to health care, to paying down principal. Instead, it went to the banks. And the banks did nothing to earn it. They did not lower their rates. They did not follow the president's request. They just kept charging. And the president did nothing to stop them. Warren made that clear. She said, President Trump and the big banks, they don't provide the 10% cap on credit cards. That is a devastating statement. The president promised to help families. He did not. The banks could have helped families. They did not. They all failed. And families are suffering. Warren then asked Dr. Morgan how families are coping. The answer is grim. 1 in 3 are skipping meals. They are skipping medications that are prescribed by their doctors. They are skimping on healthcare services. They are turning to debt. That is not a political statement. That is a human tragedy. Families are choosing between food and medicine. They are choosing between healthcare and debt. They are making impossible choices because the cost of living has gone up and their wages have not kept pace, and the president's promise to help them has been broken. Warren did not need to speculate. She did not need to hypothesize. She had the numbers. She had the witnesses. She had the facts, and she used them. The witness's performance was a case study in how to avoid answering a question. She talked about low-cost APR options. She talked about 0% interest rates. She talked about options in the marketplace. She did not name a single bank that had lowered its rate to 10%. She could not. Because there are none, she was put in an impossible position. She represents the banks. She cannot criticize them, but she also cannot defend them. So she stumbled. She evaded. She deflected. And Warren did not let her get away with it. Warren pressed. She asked again and again and again, until the witness had to admit that no bank had followed through. The hearing is also a lesson in the difference between words and actions. The president said he would do something. He did not do it. He asked the banks to do something. They did not do it. He promised the American people relief. He did not deliver it. And the American people are paying $368 million a day for that broken promise. That is the cost of inaction. That is the cost of a president who makes promises he cannot keep. That is the cost of a government that does not hold the powerful accountable. Warren's closing statement is the most important part of the hearing. She said President Trump may love inflation, but it is killing American families. That is not a political attack. That is a statement of fact. Inflation is not a game. It is not a talking point. It is a destructive force that is destroying the lives of working families. Families are struggling to afford basic necessities. They are going into debt. They are skipping meals. They are skipping medications. They are falling behind. And the president is doing nothing to help them. He is not delivering on his promises. He is not holding the banks accountable. He is not putting families first. He is putting the banks first, and the American people are paying the price. Warren ended with a call to action. Congress needs to work together to fix the president's failed economic agenda. That is the message. The president's agenda is not working. The economy is not working for working families, and Congress needs to do something about it. That is not a partisan message. That is a message of urgency. Families are hurting. They need help, and they are not getting it from the president. So Congress needs to step in. Warren is right. The affordability crisis is not a hoax. It is real. It is hurting families. And it is time for the government to do something about it. The broader context of this hearing is the disconnect between the promises politicians make and the reality that families face every day. Donald Trump campaigned on making life more affordable. He promised to lower prices, to cut costs, to make it easier for families to get by. But the reality is the opposite. Prices have gone up. Costs have gone up. Families are struggling. And instead of delivering on his promises, Trump has dismissed the very concept of affordability as a fake word made up by Democrats. That is not leadership. That is denial. He is denying the reality that millions of Americans are living every single day. He is pretending that the problem does not exist. And he is doing nothing to solve it. Warren's approach is the opposite of denial. She is confronting the problem head on. She is asking the hard questions. She is demanding answers. She is holding the powerful accountable. She is not letting the banks off the hook. She is not letting the president off the hook. She is not letting anyone off the hook. That is what oversight looks like. That is what accountability looks like. That is what leadership looks like. The affordability crisis is not going away. It is getting worse. Families are falling further behind. They are going deeper into debt. They are making harder and harder choices. And the government is not doing enough to help them. Warren's hearing is a reminder that there is a better way. There is a way to make life more affordable. There is a way to hold the banks accountable. There is a way to deliver on the promises that politicians make. But it requires leadership. It requires courage. It requires a willingness to take on the powerful interests that are profiting from the status quo. Warren has that courage. She has that willingness. And she is using it to fight for American families. The numbers are clear. $57 billion. $368 million a day. That is what Americans are paying for the president's broken promise. That is what they are paying for the bank's refusal to act. That is what they are paying for a government that does not hold anyone accountable. Warren is fighting to change that. She is fighting to make sure that families get the relief they were promised. She is fighting to make sure that the banks do not get away with charging exorbitant interest rates. She is fighting to make sure that the president does not get away with breaking his promises. That is the fight. And it is a fight worth having.